examine the strange feeling of being an isolated self.
I'm Valentin, Virtual Riot. I'm a DJ, producer, and I live in Los Angeles, come from Germany. I moved here about 6-7 years ago, and I make music since I'm 14, 15 years old. And now I make dubstep, electronic bass music, drum and bass, and I produce pop songs for other people sometimes. And I also do sound design a lot and make sample packs. And this is my studio. So I got into music through my family, which is very musical, because I have an older brother and older sister who were both learning piano when I was 6 years old. And I was like, oh, I really want to learn piano too. So I asked my mom if I can get piano lessons, and she was like, yeah, sure, of course. So I had 10 years of piano lessons till I was 16, and then did 3 more years of church organ lessons to get a church organ license, because that was the only way to earn money in the tiny village I was from. So I did that too, and that was actually really helpful because there was a lot of music theory training that was involved with that. And then at the age of around 11 or 12, I got into music production through some CD I found in a box of cereal, like, you know, when cereal came with toys or something. And it was a demo of Dance for EJ, which was like a very bare bones music production software where you can arrange some loops, and they're all in the same key and all in the same tempo. And I really loved that. And my brother at the time was already like 9-10 years older than me. He was already getting into music production, so then he hooked me up with my first copy of Cubase and a MIDI keyboard, and then that was it. When I start a song, I either start by just playing on the piano and coming up with a melody and a chord progression. I'll jam for a couple of hours, and then eventually that'll become an idea, and I will record it into MIDI and then start from there and then start the whole song. Or I'll make a sound in Serum, Massive, or any other synth and just slave away on sound design for a couple of hours. And then eventually I'll think, oh, that's a really cool sound. Maybe in this sort of pattern, it'll sound good. I'll draw a little MIDI clip and make a whole drop, and then go from there. And then I'll have a whole drop done, even do the mix down, and then, oh, now I have to do the intro, now I have to like see where this goes. So it's either this or that, like different approaches. Wherever inspiration strikes, I'll start there. I really like finding unique and weird samples to use in my music. And when I first started, I was mostly using loop masters, where I was going through all kinds of sample packs. There was BHK, Industrial Strength Records had like really cool packs on there with drum and bass loops and dubstep loops I was using back in the day. And that actually really got me into wanting to make my own sample packs as well. And then with Freaky Loops and Famous Audio, I had a bunch of packs I put on loop masters, which didn't have Virtual Riot on them at first, but I just really enjoyed like the process of it. So I got most of my samples from there, and then I was trying to find other weird ways of finding like all kinds of old school samples, stuff from movies or radio recordings. So there's this webpage called archive.org where you can find royalty-free stuff from like the 50s or the 40s, like these old commercials or training videos, how to react when the atomic bomb strikes, with like this 40s kind of announcer voice, and it's really cool. And so I would use that kind of stuff or go on freesound.org. And I also carry a little field recorder with me, so wherever I go, I'll record stuff in the wild or on tour. If I'm in the hotel room, I'll like record kitchen pots and pans, glassware, and then see where that takes me. Vocal chops, or in general, like chopping up samples, I would do sometimes on the timeline, just on an audio track, or sometimes inside of a sampler. Whether I pick one or the other, I really don't know if there's like a certain situation where I might prefer one or the other. It sometimes depends on how lazy I feel. If I feel really, if I really want to put in a lot of work, I'll put it on the timeline, be really precise with it, pitch every sample individually, give every sample individual fades. But other times I would just select lots of tiny clips from a sample, put them into a sampler, pitch them all to the correct key, and then just go ham on MIDI, like maybe sometimes even draw a random pattern. There's one track I made called Paper Planes that has this really intricate vocal chop in the middle, and that's just lots of tiny little clips from all kinds of acapellas in a sampler, and then just literally going like this, like on a different 16th note on every 16th bar, like just drawing like some interesting looking MIDI pattern and then seeing what it sounds like, and then moving it around and looking for happy accidents. What I like about Slice is that if I drag in a vocal, it cuts it up perfectly, immediately like add all the transients. And something I really like about it that a lot of other samplers don't have and that I wish they had is that I can pitch the slices individually. Because sometimes I would, like, Burial, for example, where he would like cut up a vocal and then every syllable would suddenly have a different pitch and it would like move around like its own melody. And sometimes the formant shifts with it. So suddenly like the melody goes up, but the formant goes down. These kinds of cool details I could usually only do on an audio track, but in Slice I can do it in the plugin right there, and that's really cool. So a bunch of Antares plugins I really like to use are obviously AutoTune, not just for tuning vocals, but also for the formant shifting, to give the vocal like a different character. And to do especially that, I really like using just the throat plugin to like maybe change a male vocal to sound a little more female, or to get this sort of like low pitch down, like formant shifted character that you hear in a lot of Burial songs. People like Porter Robinson use that a lot as well to like give a vocal a whole different character, or to make it sound like robotic or like some anime girl, even if you're just a guy singing it. So I think that is really cool. And then the choir plugin I would use sometimes if I'm looking to like widen the vocal to get like more stereo width on it, especially if I only have one monophonic recording and we haven't recorded any doubles. Plus, there's Harmony Engine, which we've been using in my collaborations with Prism on the vocals of Emma, who's been singing on those songs. And a lot of those are on my side project called Still Kids. It's like more future bassy with like big like vocodery chord stacks behind the vocal, where we would feed MIDI into Harmony Engine to like basically make the harmonies instead of singing it, because we're like really looking for this sound that's like half actual recorded overdubs, harmonies, but have vocodery, and it sounds really tight and nice, and I like that sound. So when I work with vocalists, I prefer doing it here in the studio, because that's like nicer to immediately like get spontaneous ideas or something and be a little more creative with it. But oftentimes that's not possible. I have to work over the internet with a lot of people, and we'll be sending like files back and forth. But sometimes that's cool too, because I'll get like an a cappella file sent, and then there might be a little melody change that I want to do, and I might not want to ask her, like, well, she's not available, and I can't ask Emma overnight, like, oh, please, can you change that little note? So I might use AutoTune or something and feed MIDI into it to change it, and then that might also even be a cool effect, because I might not want the formant to track, and so the vocal suddenly gets a different effect, like you hear in, again, Burial tracks, where suddenly the note goes up, but the formant goes down, and there's like these cool things that can come out of that as well. Or sometimes, I know some pop songs do this, we would record in like a different key and then intentionally pitch it up to the actual key of the song, so it has this kind of pitch up or pitch down effect. So for synthesis, I obviously use Serum a lot, but there are a lot of other synthesis plugins that I like that are a little more outlandish or weird, or people don't know about them. And then also Pigments, Hive. I still use Nexus a bunch for layering even, especially with the new update. There's like more editing functions, so that's nice. But every once in a while, I use hardware stuff as well to get away from the computer for a bit. So I really like modular synths, but obviously they're like expensive, and I only got like a couple of modules, but I hooked them up and got some like semi-modular stuff from what's the company, Endorphins and Dreadbox. And then I would just have sessions where I would make sounds for 2 hours and just record the output, just like keep twisting knobs, and then at the end I will have a 2-hour audio file with really weird noises in there, and then start chopping it up, look for cool parts, and then use that later on in all kinds of samplers and resynthesize that, or throw it into Serum to make a wavetable out of it. It's a little bit of both, but mostly software stuff, because I'm on the road so much, so I'm like stuck to my laptop, so I have to like do most things on there digital with plugins. So I use a couple tricks to get my songs really loud, or to make the drop punch really hard, because especially in this music niche of dubstep and electronic bass music, you wanted to get it as loud as possible and like really compressed, but also still needs to be dynamic at the same time, and it's got to sound good at festivals. I use these things where on the master, like after the mastering chain or before, I might automate the whole song to become a little quieter during the build-up, or maybe even during the whole intro, and then on the drop I'll push it by like a couple of decibels again, so it sounds like someone's taking the volume knob and just turns it up on the drop a little bit. I saw those things in like older songs from Knife Party or Pendulum, where like the whole waveform would be a little smaller at first, and then on the drop suddenly it's like a little wider. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna try that too. And a similar thing I would do with the width of the song. So the whole stereo width would go smaller and smaller during the build up, so it would sound like more mono. And then on the drop, open it up to 100% again. So you have this contrast. But it's like kind of like psychoacoustic, like you don't notice it really, but suddenly it just sounds wider and louder. And then obviously I will compress and limit, but as of recently, I would even not use limiters on the master that much, but just like hard clip into the red, and the distortion kind of just adds to the sound in this kind of genre, so you can kind of do it. If there's a vocal in the intro, I would still use like a softer limiter. So if you have like a sub and then the vocal, obviously in a clipper, that would start to really crunch and you start to hear artifacts. But then I would turn that limiter off on the drop, and then the drum transients sometimes click into like plus 10 or plus 15 decibels. But it sounds good because it works for the style, and in the context, it makes sense. And so that's what I do. So yeah, I mix my own records, and in rare cases, sometimes it'll be mastered by someone else if it comes out on someone else's release and they have all their stuff mastered by someone else. Or the releases in the past I did with Monster Cat, they would have their in-house mastering guy who would do it. But especially in this genre, the mastering and mixing of your own tracks is like a big part of your signature sound. So a lot of my stuff is influenced by video game soundtracks. There's a bunch of things I used to play a lot when I was younger, like obviously all the chiptune stuff like Pokemon and Super Mario, where like the chiptune soundtracks I would really enjoy actually listening to. But there's also the video game music of Portal and Half-Life. I used to be a big Valve fanboy and play all the Valve games, and that had a lot of influence on me too. And there was this one game that was actually a German production called Aquanox, where you did like, it was like a futuristic underwater thing that was like cyberpunky, like humanity lives underwater, and it was like a first-person submarine shooter game, but it was like you weren't in a submarine. It was basically spaceships because it was the future. But the music in the background was like kind of like the Prodigy with distorted 303s and trashy drums, and I really loved that soundtrack, and that's had a lot of influence on me too. So I'm heavily influenced by the music I listened to when I was younger, albums from Dream Theater, Spock's Beard, Genesis, Gentle Giant, like very concept album stuff where you have like different themes reappearing everywhere, or the tracks blend into each other. That's something I was like trying to do on the new album, but it's like takes a lot of extra work to like really make it work, especially if there's different tempos and different keys. But the Save Yourself EP had that a lot more, where like the first 5 songs or something all go into each other, and then have like reappearing themes or melodies all over the place, where there's one song on the new album called Redline where basically everything is based on a dotted 8th note pattern that's just like a dun 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 thing. But it starts off with the drums doing it, and then in the drop you suddenly have like a completely different soundscape, but now the bass is doing it, so you need to like tease a certain theme or rhythmic pattern first for it to then make sense if it appears in the drop. There's still a lot of influence I take from screamo and emo stuff I used to listen to, like Alexis on Fire, Artreyu, Under Oath, and then eventually I got into Enter Shikari before I even got into electronic music, and they made this amazing blend of trance, dubstep almost, but hardcore metal at the same time, and like really melodic and really cool. And that was a big influence for me, still is. Then also BT, with his Emotional Technology album, because that was like one of the first electronic records I used to listen to. And then now there's this new wave of a lot of young kids who get into music production and make crazy stuff, especially now with the melodic rhythm and future rhythm melodic dubstep scene. There's a lot of cool stuff I hear now that still inspires me, and I still go by this method of I listen to something and if I like, when I really like it, I'm like, oh, I want to do something like this too, but if I did it, I would do it this way. And then you bring in your own creativity and you change it, or I'll try to remake the sound of someone else that I've heard somewhere because I really like it and I want to know how it's made, but I obviously won't get there 100% because I don't know exactly what they did. But during this process, I will learn my own techniques. I'll find like my own little things like, oh, this is what this does, and this, I didn't get there 100%, but actually this is cool too, and I like this, and then I might use that. And eventually this brings me to my signature sound, I guess. So that's my method there. So at the end of last year, I put out my first real album and have been touring with it for the last 6 months. I just came back from Europe from a couple of shows there, played Rampage, and now the tour is about to end, and I'm playing a couple of festivals in the summer like EDC and Tomorrowland. And then after that, towards the end of the year, I want to sit back down and basically do another album, but a little more conceptualized, even more than the last one. The last one had like this login and log out thing and this whole virtual reality theme, but I think I could do like a whole concept album that's like all connected, and that's something I really want to work on. And then with that, a live show that's a little more special and not just a DJ set, maybe bring a keyboard, play some things live. And that's what I want to work on and rehearse and get that perfect, and then maybe tour with that again.